Thank you and welcome to our two speakers for the session this afternoon, Amanda and Janek. And the way the session will work, it's 45 minutes and we'll do a little bit of intro so you know who we are and a little bit of scene setting. We'll go into the session and then we'll have questions and answers at the end. And please do use the chat or the Q&A function to ask your questions. It's always just a bit easier if we capture all those as we go through and we can ask those and answer those at the end, which would be fantastic. So to introduce myself, I'm Sam Healy. I'm Director of Corporate Responsibility and Sustainability at Kinetic. And I've been in sustainability environment for over 25 years. And I think the dynamic pace of what we're seeing now is unprecedented. And I'm sure we hear that word quite a lot. And I'm also, and it's been a great privilege to serve as a member of the ICRS board. And my particular focus area is around skills. And I'm so passionate about the skills that we need as a community in our unique role as CRNS practitioners, but also the development that we can provide for others within our wider community who are increasingly getting involved through their roles and in helping us embed CRNS through what they do. And I'm so pleased to be moderating this session, really just because I was excited by the language that Amanda and Janek are bringing to this session. It felt so dynamic and made me feel that there's a role for the CRNS profession to be proactive and not reactive and really own that space. So I'm going to ask our two presenters to introduce themselves and to then move into the presentation. So Amanda, are you happy to say who you are and where you're from? That'd be great.
Yes, hi everyone. Thanks very much, Sam, and great to be here. So I'm Chief Executive of Forster Communications, and we're all about sustainability communications, essentially. So look forward to getting stuck into the topic of bravery.
Fantastic. And Janek?
Hi, thanks, Sam, for the welcome, and pleased to meet you all. So I lead the impact consultancy offering at Charities Aid Foundation. And we've been fortunate enough to be collaborative partners of Forster over the past couple of years. And yeah, really excited to share some of that exciting language with you around bravery and adaptation over the course of today's session.
Wonderful. Well, Hannah, I think you've got the slides. Are you happy to share those and we can make a start of the session? And then say to everyone, please do add your questions in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll come to those at the end. So over to you, Chris. Thank you.
That's perfect. Thanks, Helene. So what we would like to do today, if you could move to the second slide, please. We'll start off with a bit of an overview into this concept of bravery and moving into adaptation. And I think Amanda has got some more timely insights to share as well. But we're again, delighted to have the opportunity to talk with you all, and looking forward to the Q&A in particular. But as a way of an overview, a little over a year ago, we launched our collaborative report, Bold Thinking, Brave Action. And this was really an exploration of the idea of bravery in sustainability. So it was something that was being spoken about a lot at the time, but without a really clear sense of what taking brave action actually meant or what it looked like. So with that, we embarked on a deeper discussion with 11 sustainability leaders from different sized businesses and different sectors, so from B Corps and corporate foundations through to major household brands and multinational companies. And we really wanted to explore what bravery meant for each of them and how these insights could help others step forward as change makers. So our findings helped us articulate responses to four main questions. So firstly, what makes someone brave? Importantly. Secondly, what do I need to do to act bravely? Then what kind of brave do I need to be? And finally, how can I make the biggest impact? So when it comes to what makes someone brave, our analysis showed that there were 5 attributes or personal qualities, really, that all brave leaders hold in common. Similarly, we found 5 key behaviors or actions that people need to take to act bravely. And then the interesting question that came up for us is, if bravery does indeed have many faces, what kind of brave do I need to be in my organization? And so we developed 5 composite characters to help think about which role you might need to play in your organization and when. And to address the final question on how we can make the biggest impact, we were aware that bravery is demonstrated by individuals, but also that there are external factors that will affect how bravely we can act as individuals. And so we identified 9 organizational conditions that need to be in place to encourage brave thinking and behavior. If you could go to the next slide, please. Perfect, thank you. So to show you, I appreciate it might be a little bit small on your screen, but to show you how these all fit together, the inner circle starts with the personal attributes of brave leaders, which are conviction, passion, humility, imagination, and integrity. And the next layer out is about how you put these personal attributes into practice, so the behaviors you display. And these are giving your ideas to others, creating a movement, taking on personal risk, thinking big, and making things happen. And so finally, the outer layer shows where our brave characters come in. And so what you may be able to see from the visual is that each of the characters displays 2 of the brave behaviors. So the wayfinder there at the top is about making things happen and giving your idea to others. And then the collectivist to the right-hand side is about giving your idea to others and creating a movement, and so on. And so at the center of all of this is challenging the status quo, which is, in short, as Sam was kind of suggesting at the top, that's why we all do what we do. And as one of our contributors put it, bravery is not just accepting the status quo and that things might happen that aren't great for the environment and for society. It's trying to unpick the way things have been done before. So if you could go to the next slide, please. Bravery at an individual level, as we've suggested, is critical, but it is, of course, impacted by the organization in which an individual works. And our research made clear that there are 3 critical areas that can help or sometimes squash bold thinking. And the 3 of these are purpose, so why we do what we do and what makes us us. People, so who we are and what kind of culture we want. And practice, so how we do what we do and our ways of working. And this was kind of the eureka moment that drew all of our research together, because when we put all of our organizational conditions together, we overlaid where our characters have the biggest impact. And so we realized at that moment that bravery doesn't just have many faces, but it actually requires many faces. So for example, it's great to have a firebrand leader who can set a really compelling purpose, but how is that person then going to put it into practice? And so the discussions we've had since the launch of the report have been really encouraging, and the framework has been received as a helpful way to codify bravery and have some important internal conversations. However, we launched this in July last year, and as you can tell by the timing, the challenge we then faced was launching this very neat framework on bravery into a very complicated, uncertain world. And if you could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So a little over a year on from the launch of our original report, and the world has fundamentally changed. So businesses are having to factor in a complex set of requirements relating to environmental and social challenges that are also informed by public opinion and now underpinned by economic and political volatilities. So as I'm sure you're all too aware, there's an ever-growing list of responsibilities for sustainability leaders to address, from some of the inequalities highlighted through the pandemic, a range of environmental concerns brought to light at COP over the last couple of weeks, through to diversity and inclusion, social justice, and a move towards a kind of hyper-transparency in demonstrating good corporate governance and ethics. So sustainable action is needed now more than ever. And not only must companies ensure that they maintain a license to operate, they also need to recognize their role in driving positive change. And this is something that will become increasingly complex as activities put forward to stimulate economic growth may conflict with sustainability goals. And we know that we can't have growth at any cost. So managing this state of flux requires a new mindset. And as always, organizations need to be clear about where they're heading with tangible goals linked to things like the SDGs and net zero targets. But the route to achieving these goals needs to be agile in the knowledge that the world we're living in is volatile and uncertain. So what we do know is waiting is not an option, and that we as sustainability leaders need to make progress in a constant state of adaptation. So that's listening, learning, adjusting in order to reflect the ever-changing and often unpredictable conditions. So the starting point is to ask the right questions and then to keep on asking them. And if you could go to the next slide, please. In that vein, we, the team at Forster and CAF, revisited our original framework and asked ourselves, well, so much has changed. Is this framework still relevant in today's world? And we found that bravery is still crucial today in late 2021 and is indeed needed now more than ever to drive change for the SDGs, net zero, building back better, among many of the other key markers for a fair and healthy planet. We also challenge whether our three categories that you see in front of you of purpose, people, and practice still rang true. And with companies leading the charge during the first wave of the pandemic and really living out their purpose, and with an ever-growing interest in building a safe and inclusive culture, we felt that these categories are as important today as they were last year. And so what we determined was that the last year has intensified these organizational conditions. And through this, it's increased the ability that you have as sustainability leaders to take brave action. So our new report has identified both enablers and inhibitors for each of these three organizational conditions. And it's allowed us to put forward a new mindset that is critical for sustainability success in today's very uncertain world. And so what I'll do now is hand over to Amanda to talk through these conditions.
Thank you very much, Janek. And if we could have the next slide, please. The first one is digging into purpose. And this is an organisational condition, really looking at whether an organisation has a compelling vision, an openness to change and core values to build from. And actually what we fundamentally know is that the pandemic has reinforced how crucial these are, and actually many enablers coming through to support the case for action around purpose. So at the start of the year, we had 85% of businesses were more committed to sustainability than they've been in 2020, and 70% of firms believe that COVID-19 had accelerated climate action. Other research also showed that businesses are now recognised as the most trusted institutions in the world. That's above governments and NGOs, with 68% of people saying that CEOs should step in when government does not fix social problems. And of course, since then, we've had COP26. Hope everyone's recovered from the last fortnight of franticness. And the pressure for change has rightly accelerated even further. So the Glasgow Climate Pact has fundamentally confirmed that 1.5 degrees C is the ambition, and there is increased pressure for plans and performance and action. Or to use someone else's words, so UN high-level climate action champion Nigel Topping said, if you haven't got a net zero target now, you're looking like you don't care about the next generation, and you're not paying attention to regulations coming down the pipeline, your credit rating's at risk, and your ability to attract and keep talent is at risk. So that's, that's pretty bold stuff, as we all know from there. There's also other movements going on. So just before COP26, GlobeScan found that 6 in 10 of the global public favour a carbon tax on energy sources. And that's an increase of 10 points since 2015. So that support for taxation that reduces carbon emissions is the highest recorded in nearly 15 years. And it's another driver for change. All this, we've seen rapid innovation coming through COVID-19, and we've seen what can happen when there is a focus and organised really prioritise action. And now actually that level of expectation is around the climate agenda. So good, lots of enablers, really strong and really helping us as sustainability practitioners push this forward. But despite the logic, there are inhibitors, and these are also grown too. Many organisations are suffering financially as a result of the pandemic. We can't, ignore that as a key thing. And some organisations are putting climate action priorities ahead of social issues, and I think that's something we need to come back to. It will ultimately create conflict, and the sense of a just transition needs to be really front of mind. At the start of the year, 25% of employees still reported a lack of commitment of senior management on their board as a key barrier for corporate sustainability. And a third of practitioners said that their business had done nothing to promote the SDG agenda. Only 23% of people said that their company saw sustainability drivers as a way of identifying new market opportunities or developing new products. So, I mean, if we're all people who can see this logic, but it is worth remembering the context and all that and what we need to overcome. If we could have the next slide, please. So the next area is people, and we know that passionate people, psychological safety and an enabling culture are all really key for bravery. So there can be no doubt that how organisations treated their employees came to a fore as part of the pandemic, and that there are now increased expectations from individuals. There's a focus on wellness, and there's a rise in new working models that support flexibility. That's really exciting, and it's not going to change. You can just see, even last week, discussions about hybrid working are very widespread, and interesting to see comments from a Bank of England spokesperson on the front page of several news agendas saying that women's careers are going to be held back by working from home. So it's a hot topic. It's going to keep pushing forward around that. This is all happening at a time when also it's increasingly hard to find good people, and that should mean that recruitment and retention alone are strong enough drivers for sustainability action. We've seen, again, positive things around really rapid rise with members of the Living Wage campaign. I think there's now 9,000 employees and half of the FTSE 100 who are part of that movement, and a third of those have signed up since the start of the pandemic, which is that's the fastest rate of increase in the 10 years of the foundation. Again, that's great to see. But again, as activism rises for many organisations, the reality of furlough and the working from home has fragmented culture. And it's actually built internal silos rather than breaking them down. And then a lot of organisations are finding themselves working with increasingly narrow strategic priorities. So there are concerns about job security, and that might stop people from speaking up. And obviously, there's still ongoing reality about COVID, which is very persistent around that. There are still budget restrictions, so investment in culture and training can be limited. And what we're really going to come up against is a skills and knowledge gap around how to respond to these new priorities and green skills economy. It's really going to be increasingly important that confidence and training comes through on this, so that green skills are for all of us, not just a few specialist people in a corner. So that's going to be something that's become more and more prevalent, and we need to really push forward around it. If we could have the new slide, please. Oh, sorry about one. So the final area is practice. And this is where robust governance, proven accountability and permission to invest are really needed for brave action. And actually, overall, I think we have reason to be optimistic here. So sustainability requirements and practices are becoming prevalent in the boardroom, and they are increasingly supported by government action through both policy and procurement. So the pandemic has shown that forecast risks do happen, and climate action failure is the highest likelihood risk in the next 10 years. I don't need to tell you all about, you know, the numbers of damage that was caused last year by 2020, the lives that are already being lost. And certainly I found one of the most powerful things from the COP26 was actually hearing people from island nations speaking out around, you know, we know it, but to hear it reiterated is really important. And again at COP, you know, the role of investors were reiterated by Mark Carney, 130 trillion of private capital available apparently to meet net zero emissions targets. So the question is not for companies about whether to take steps, but it's about which ones to take. And it's a really, I think, important about how to build that into boardroom governance. Non-executive director education is really urgent. And I think it's really worth looking at Chapter Zero's work. It's very important in this area. And we need sustainability and finance to work more closely together to unlock funds. 57% of sustainability practitioners don't currently feel they have big enough budgets to achieve their corporate responsibility KPIs. And yet we're hearing that the money is out there. So it's how we can shift this internal short-term thinking and structures and move towards longer term. And, you know, perhaps some of that comes through linking CR performance and executive remuneration. At the moment, again, only 15% of practitioners, so there are links there. And that simple change could make a fundamental difference. New slide, please. So I just thought it'd be worth spending a couple of minutes on COP, if that's okay, and just what that means going forward. A few observations. I think the first thing is that really came through from us is that people matter. First person stories, activist movements, business leaders putting their head above the parapet. This is what creates change, and it gives politicians permission to take difficult decisions. You know, we as sustainability practitioners understand the messages that came through from COP, but not everyone does. And it's really important now that we get this sustainability out beyond the bubble. We have to keep people at the heart of climate change, and that is incredibly important for us. The second observation is about the fact that the numbers must add up. I don't know how many of you heard a fairly quirky conversation on BBC Radio 4 with political correspondent Adam Fleming talking about the carbon footprint of a locally sourced bacon sandwich at COP26 being lower than that of a croissant. But what it ended up exposing was errors in the menu labelling system and the fact that the croissant was actually a vegan one, but had been given an all butter carbon count. So anyway, it's a story, but it's a small example of a bigger question, which is what numbers do you trust? And we've got a whole leash of targets from countries, from businesses, from investors, and actually as the focus turns to delivery, the way in which that information is recorded and reported is going to become more and more critical. So yes, global systems like the International Sustainability Standards Board is crucial, but it's going to take time to set up. And I think it's up to each organisation to make sure that their numbers are transparent, comparable, and add up to action. And that is, you know, our role as the sustainability leaders to be doing that, and it might take some brave thinking coming through. Another observation is that collaboration absolutely continues. So from the positive pledges around methane deforestation, to the surprising reality of US and China coming together, to ongoing examples of businesses coming together like Energize, the pharmaceutical collaboration. This is really about learning, sharing, leapfrogging, and we know that working together works. And actually, I would say now it's the time to break down barriers between sectors. And again, perhaps this is where Bravery comes in, bring in things that provide permission to look differently at the systems, this question of lived experience alongside experts, and we need to look at collaboration in an unexpected way as well as expected. Systems change, critical before offsetting. I went, you know, the Article 6, hugely detailed, really important, but actually we need offsetting to remain controversial in the last resort. It's got to be in that way, but if there is to be there, it has to be accountable. So real, verified, additional, you know, all good drivers around that. I think we're going to see this as a continuingly much more contentious area for us, despite systems around it. And then a couple just to finalise, we mustn't forget the SDGs. the headlines are about climate targets, but action needs to take place within the overall context. And actually, I think the conversation is really yet to turn on how to achieve a just transition. So I think it's about stop seeing ESG as three separate things. And the next thing is to really join those up, social and environmental actions together. So we're going to really need to keep pushing that forward. And then just finally, the countdown to COP27 has begun. I mean, we all know this. COP26 was a fragile win, and it has hopes and possibilities, but it hasn't achieved everything. So actually, we've got 12 months, and that is the starting bell to campaigning. It should be something that, whilst we might all be tired for the last 2 weeks, we need to see it with energy and excitement, and actually a call to our own bravery to step forward around that. So I was just going to hand back to Janek, who's going to provide some pointers.
Thanks, Amanda. I hope you all enjoyed those insights as much as I did. I was very thankful to Amanda and the team at Forster for putting them together, because I mean, the last 2 weeks have been very hard to kind of find a foothold in and make sense of. There were, twists and turns in the story. But I think, hearing those insights, I think something we can't deny is the complexity of the current moment, and this isn't something that is going to change. And although many of us can't wait to get back to the way things were, they're never going to go back to the way they were. And the only thing that we can be really sure about is that unexpected events are now to be expected. And so that brings us to this concept of active adaptation, and bravery for us as sustainability professionals has to be about adaptation, or making progress in an uncertain world. And this will require bravery, as we'll need to demonstrate a range of behaviors, as Amanda touched upon just then, from taking on personal risk to creating a movement in order to challenge the status quo and constantly strive for better. Practically, this is going to mean, I think, shifting away from a linear way of thinking, so just getting from A to B, to something more multifaceted and fluid, that acknowledges that there will be various routes to getting to the end goal. I think something that could particularly come to light if, as Amanda says, we break down industry barriers and foster a more collaborative approach to achieving these goals. What it will also mean is just getting started and getting on with things, even without these well-trodden linear routes. If we wait for the perfect conditions, we'll never get started. And I think, as everybody who works in sustainability knows, perfection is the enemy of progress. So what we've done, just to round today's session off, is taken the typical questions that are asked as part of sustainability strategy planning, and we've changed them to reflect this new world, and hopefully help stimulate bold thinking in the face of all of this uncertainty. So if you could go to the first of these questions, please. Thank you. So the first question is, how often do you review your sustainability goals to ensure they meet global expectations? So, as we've really hammered home, the world is moving incredibly fast, and we don't want to be left behind. So while 3 to 5 year goals are critical for target setting, you might find that you need new ones to be added, or that deadlines need to be changed. 3-year plans are quickly outdated. Next question, please. So what information do you use and to ensure that your business fully recognizes the connections between what's material to you and what is of high importance to your external stakeholders? So do you really know how the attitudes and priorities of your customers, influencers, investors, employees have changed? And how can you use this to encourage and enable support for action internally? And are you really bringing the outside world in? Next slide, please. What level of flex and contingency is built into your budgets to enable you to respond to changing conditions and challenges in the outside world. So what can be learnt from the rapid change that was required during the pandemic, and how can that be used to inform fixed versus flexible spend going forwards? Can you consider expenditure in a more holistic way, perhaps working with other departments in the organisation, in particular to ensure that expenditure in one area is not in conflict with sustainability priorities in another area? Next slide, please. Thank you. How many opportunities do others in your organisation have to reflect on progress against your sustainability plan, and influence any changes or adaptations? So this really goes back to the point Amanda made about collaboration and openness. So now is really the time to join up sustainability across an organisation and not just kind of narrow down. So how can you include influences, internal influences in creating action with you? From the point just before about joint budgets, through to recognizing the potential for collaboration internally and externally. I think that the pandemic and the level of exposure from COP have shown us our interconnectedness, and also that there's an increased desire from many outside of this function for sustainability action. So how can we, actively involve them? And if you go to the next slide, this is the final question. So what's the bravest thing that your company did last year when it came to sustainability? And crucially, how can you beat it next year? There's a lot to take in. There's a lot to be nervous about, but we can't lose ambition in the face of uncertainty. And brave action is inspiring as well as high impact. And it could be the catalyst that your organization needs to rebuild post-pandemic, and as Amanda said, to keep the 1.5 degrees alive. So I'll hand it back over to you, Amanda, to wrap up the session.
Thanks, Janek. And really just to summarise the whole thing, we need to be brave. We need to think differently in a non-linear way, as Janek said. And there's, I think, a lot of enablers for us at the moment, as well as ongoing inhibitors. So it's how to join up and harness those and help us to push our organisations forward. So really look forward to hearing your thoughts and observations around this as well, to help us all take progress. Thank you.
Brilliant. Amanda and Janek, thank you so much for a wonderful presentation. And I think one of the things that sadly we lose being virtual is a massive round of applause, which I know you would get if we were all in a room together. So thank you so much for that. I think what you've done through both your presentation and the report, and I would urge everyone to read the report if you we'll send out the links, is you've taken such a big topic and used, as I said at the start, just really empowering language and exceptional clarity. I found the way that you've expressed your views is really empowering for me, and makes me feel that tomorrow I can, start with renewed vigor and get cracking. And there's so many points on there that I really resonate with me. But what I'd like to do is perhaps just pass on to you some of the questions that we're getting first in the QA, and then I'll pick those up in the chat. And I think this one really resonated with me because I'm doing quite a lot of work across my sector, and we see ourselves as greater than the sum of our parts, so trying to work together. But someone's raised the challenge of around breaking down barriers around problems like competition law, where actually great ideas are slightly kiboshed by issues of potentially also intellectual property. I don't know whether this has come up in your thinking or some of the feedback you've got, or you've got any perspectives on that. I know that's quite a big question.
I can have a first comment on that, although I say from the outset I'm not a lawyer, but I think you're absolutely right. There is a lot of structures and regulation in place that can naturally stop or put limits around some of this. And it was very interesting during the pandemic, because I think competition law was changed to enable food to be distributed through the supermarkets in a collaborative way, to make sure that everyone got, distribution helps, things like that. So there clearly is an opportunity to change some of these structures when it's needed, and perhaps this is about where organisations need to go back through their industry groups and things to government to say, okay, we need these existing structures to change in order to enable us to take some of these actions faster. And this is all part of fundamentally, we need systems change. The world shouldn't be looking the same if we're going to get a way through this. This isn't, I think it's a real concern that we're going to, we're trying to mend things within the existing way, and actually the problem's bigger than that. So it's a great question, and the answer is probably yes. The question then is, how do we make it happen, I think, and do it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Janek, is there anything you wanted to add to that, or are you in agreement with Amanda?
No, completely. It wasn't something that was specifically addressed in our research, but one of our contributors did remind us that the material challenges for whatever industry we work in don't just stop, in the edge of our back garden. Like it crosses over into other industries. And the point was made about, thinking about broader stakeholder value and how we have a more inclusive idea of what material, societal and environmental issues are, and which voices we include to come up with meaningful responses to that. So I think although it will be no end of red tape and constrictions, I suppose more creatively looking at it might be to think of opportunities to collaborate, to, where collaboration is possible, as opposed to focusing on the things that you can't work together with others on.
Thank you. And we've got a question there in the chat, Amanda, about carbon units, and it references, I think, some of the key points that came out of COP26. So I don't know if you can see that in the chat, but I'll read it out for everybody, because I'm not sure what everybody else can see. So a question for Amanda: is there a danger of reliance on verified carbon units that actually don't move the dial to the 1.5 degrees? It would seem that currently most verified units are to ensure no loss of forests or less harmful emissions. These maintain the status quo rather than reduce emissions. Shouldn't verified credits only apply to additionality? They take the additional emissions out of the atmosphere. What's really happening? So I don't know whether you're happy to answer that question, or
again, it's a very technical one, but overall I completely agree. I mean, it has to be about additionality, and I think actually the tolerance for some of the offsetting overall is going to really shrink down, and that's so it needs to become the last resort, or part of a broader transition, rather than something that you can just be done and ticked off. So I think they're all part of that same piece, and the fact that I think there was progress in looking at how those would be accounted for, but it's not finalised yet in all the technical detail. So I think it's a tricky topic, definitely.
Absolutely. So one of the things that really struck me in what you were talking about was, I suppose, the interconnectedness of the ESG, and it is so convenient to stick them in those nice three little columns. But I think many of us are finding that our conversations are far richer by bringing colleagues from different parts together, and certainly in our own climate change steering group at Kinetic, we've brought a multidisciplinary team together because it is a multifaceted problem. Do you think there are any further ways that we can promote that as a community? Because I think sometimes these silos seem insurmountable. You've got an energy team over one side, an HR team over the other. Are you seeing any best practice in perhaps some of the colleagues that you spoke to with their tips about promoting that multidisciplinary intersectionality, both inside and outside of organisations?
Let me have a first go at that one. It's interesting to hear you say that, Sam, because what we're also finding and working with clients is the intersectionality of a lot of these, the E, the S and the G have, as you said, typically been seen as quite separate, as opposed to interconnected and intersectional. And I think some of the statistics that Amanda talked about in the presentation show that there are compounding impacts upon certain groups. I'm not aware of a kind of panacea other than the challenge is, because I don't know who would ultimately be responsible for being the kind of orchestra conductor, but is to bring together these task force in a way that recognizes what is in it for each of these business leaders in fulfilling their objectives, because people are extremely busy, particularly people who take leadership of those E, S, and G areas. So I think it could really do with someone who can spot and draw out the connections between those areas, so that can show that bringing this group together would be more than the sum of its parts. But I'm not quite sure how, who that person is. I think if we could create a production line of people like that would be extremely helpful. But Amanda, I'm not sure if there's anything you'd add to that.
No, I mean, I agree with that. Just to think of it from a slightly different side, I think sometimes it's about thinking about the activity rather than always the measure. So I think if you look at something like food waste, that's really interesting as an issue, because actually it creates clear carbon reduction metrics and as well as potentially feeding people or changing things in that way. So there's sometimes people can get united around the activity from that different way, and that can be a motivating way of looking at things, so that people are coming together and doing something and they're all benefiting from it, whether it's as a environmental route. I think that's what we need to see more of around the whole things, and that's why I still love the SDG framework, because it is about that interconnectedness, and we know that there's no point, you can't do something in one column if it's impacting another one. It's like, what are those bits that join it all up? I think that's where we need to get back to a little bit.
Fantastic, and I think the SDGs are so powerful. We did a wonderful game with Earthwise. They came in to support us, and it involved the SDGs and string and the interconnectedness, and it was fantastic. So, but I love what you've said about the activity focus. I think that's great. I think we've got time for one more question, and I just we've got a great question here, which is, as you did your research and spoke to people, was there anything that surprised you through or talking to people that perhaps you hadn't expected would be included in your findings?
So for me, I think there's something really interesting around the fact that an individual has to wear many hats. So it's easy quite often to think of yourself as, okay, I'm a strategist, or I'm a wayfinder, or but actually to get really the job done, it's that ability sometimes to have to play a different role and a different part in order to achieve your own, to achieve the game around that. And so to see that quite so clearly coming from different people, it was really helpful to be reminded that sometimes you have to play different roles in order to achieve your objectives overall.
And for me, it was the idea of humility and how important an attribute it is. And I think we can all think of sustainability colleagues who are very passionate, who are very have their strong convictions, but have perhaps struggled in bringing people on board. And I think when you're thinking about things like creating a movement, or being a campaigner and connecting to the issues that are really important internally, it does take a huge degree of humility. And one of our contributors reminded us that the first thing that you have to do as a sustainability leader is kind of leave your ego at the door, and in fact seeing yourself as a sustainability leader could be a bit of a red flag in itself, in that it's perhaps suggesting that you're not as humble as you could be. I'm not sure if that was taken a bit far, but the idea of humility and listening to others was a surprise, but something that I've kind of tried to hold on to today.
Fab. Thank you both so much for an absolutely wonderful session. That's been terrific. And I know we've had a great number of attendees, some lovely questions there. And I would just say I would encourage everybody to read the full report. It's terrific. And we should be definitely circulating it with other organisations and our network. So thank you both so much for your time. It's been fantastic. Thank you.